Okay, now recording. So, welcome everyone. Thank you very, very much for coming. This should be a really interesting presentation. First of all, I'd just like to quickly begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Biripi people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that we all live, work and play on. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the connection that they still have to the land, water and all living beings of this area. So Silas gave me very little to go on in terms of introduction. He didn't want me to talk about him. So, but he's the Beach Warden, so he's contracted by national parks to look after our shorebirds. I think that's what Beach Warden means. And his background is in environmental science. And that's all I've got to say about him because he wouldn't tell me anything else. So with that, I will pass over to Silas and I will make him host so that he can share his screen when he wants to.
Okay, yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about shorebirds. And as Helen said, I'm contracted as a beach warden for the Manning Estuary. So this contract is through Saving Our Species and Hunter Local Land Services. And a big part of that role is community engagement. So I need to educate the public about shorebirds and particularly migratory shorebirds and beach nesting birds. So the other part of the beach warden role is assisting the nesting season of little terns and pied oystercatchers and beach-stone curlews. So I have a bit of a presentation. I'll just share my screen. One sec. Is everyone got my PowerPoint presentation shared?
Yeah. Yes, we can see that. Okay,
cool. Okie dokie. Yeah, so as I said, the beach warden role that takes up my summer. So from September till March, I was spending a fair bit of time on the beach talking to people and also monitoring the nesting habits of the birds. So there's three species there's a few more species, but three main species that I look after their nesting in the Manning Valley. So we've got little terns, that's sort of small tern, we'll get to them in time. Pied oystercatchers, which are black and white with a big red beak, pretty distinctive looking bird, and they are nesting at the moment actually, and beach-stone curlews. So I sort of keep an eye on the birds and wait till they start nesting. I'll record their nest locations and keep an eye on the amount of eggs and hatchlings and ultimately fledglings. So the goal is to protect their roosting and breeding areas in the Manning Estuary, and the Saving Our Species goal is to protect the wild populations for up to 100 years, well, more than 100 years ideally, but that's the goal. And so there's been management of beach nesting birds in the Manning since 1992, and there's a huge amount of data and paperwork that exists for this management that's happened. And I did a review of all this last year, and one thing that kept cropping up was the benefit of community engagement. When the community engagement's not there, the program just doesn't succeed. You really need to have community ownership, and the community needs to be on board because we need to focus on sharing the shore, because the birds need the shore, but we also need the shore as well, really, because we spend a lot of time there, for people work there and people play there, and the birds live and breed there. So today I'm just going to give an overview of shorebirds, and I'll focus on a few species that we have in the Manning. And as Helen said, if you want to keep questions to the end, or even you could put them in the chat and I can run through them at the end. But yeah, I'll go into as much detail as I can. All right, so what is a shorebird? So it's a fairly, there's not a hard and fast definition, but typically along global coastlines, there's a pretty wide variety of birds. In the Manning, we've got quite a lot of species, including little terns, oystercatchers, sand plovers, sandpipers, beachstone curlews, dotterels, banded lapwings. And there's a fair diversity of species, but typically they're not the most exciting birds to look at, and they can be pretty hard to ID. Often you might need to go on body size, bill size, and shape, feather patterns, head markings, and leg colours. So as far as in a broader sense of bird ID, they're a bit harder. But when you get to know them and know their story, they're a lot more exciting. Once you get a bit of context. So most shorebirds typically are long-legged birds and mostly associated with wetland habitats. There's about 12 families and 210 species worldwide. Some migrate and some are pretty much totally sedentary for their whole life. They might move around a little bit, and particularly once they're fledged, they might go and find a home and then they'll settle down. But others undertake huge migrations that it's almost hard to believe is possible. So I'm going to include terns as shorebirds in this talk because they benefit from the same management actions in the same areas and they live on the shore. So I'm going to consider them shorebirds. Okay, so the first species I want to cover will be the far eastern curlew. So this is a pretty common species here in the Manning. And they are the biggest of all the shorebirds. So they get up about 1.3 kilos and stand probably about 40 centimetres off the ground. And they've done a fair bit of research recently tracking them using radio trackers to track their migration. And so it's super amazing, this migration. It's about 20,000 kilometres from, this map here only has Australia, but we've nicely left out New Zealand, which is a major resting site. So the areas in yellow are where they'll rest, and then they ultimately end up for the northern summer in the green areas in Russia and northeastern China. So they will stay here sometimes in the winter. So juvenile birds might overwinter here in the Manning Valley, and we counted 9 in August at Farquhar Inlet. And so these are globally declining, and it's a problem for any migratory bird because, well, anything that lives on the shore is losing habitat pretty much world over. And if you're a migratory bird, you have more than one habitat, more than one home. So in the case of the eastern curlews, they have more than 2 homes. So they have their summer resting site and they have their breeding site, but they also have anywhere they rest in between. And so if you look at there's like a yellow circle below the green breeding sites around sort of Korea and Japan. These resting sites are really important on a 20,000 kilometre trip because anyone that does any kind of travel will know it's pretty important to rest. And we don't even fly, so you can imagine how important it is for them. And pretty much everywhere they go, there's development. So this problem is not just the eastern curlew, but any migratory bird. But they're in serious decline all over the world, and they're critically endangered federally. But you'll commonly see them in the Manning, particularly at Farquhar. And in the summer, I think we counted about 30 or 40. So that's a nice, easy shorebird to see. They're the biggest one. So yeah, next time you're down there, have a look and see if you can pick them out. So another species also common in the Manning, but again declining globally, is the bar-tailed Godwit. This is a bit smaller, probably 30 centimetres tall. Again, fairly brown plumage when they're here in the Manning. Possibly they might be a bit brighter if you see them soon, because they start to lose their breeding plumage when they arrive back from their massive migration. So they have the largest non-stop migration of any bird. So Australia and New Zealand is where they'll spend the summer down here. Then they'll migrate to Scandinavia, Northern Asia, and Alaska. And they fly about 11,000 kilometers in 8 days, non-stop. And they can lose probably half their body weight during that flight. So we counted 88 Godwits in the Manning down at Farquhar on the 12th of August. So that's probably juveniles that have overwintered here. So they probably flew back at the beginning of last summer, and then they'll spend the winter here to get stronger to make the trip back for the northern summer. So yeah, they're another fairly distinguishable bird with a bit of an upturned beak, but again, sort of pretty bland colouring. But as you start to look at a bit of detail, you'll start to pick a bit of difference. So the next one, this is a little tern. The Manning sites are extremely important breeding sites. So some years it's the most important breeding site in New South Wales. They're not here yet. Last year they arrived from Southeast Asia in the first week of October. I think there was about 800 and something birds counted at their peak, but breeding pairs there was 38, I think, last year at Manning. So these probably take up most of my time for the summer, the little terns. They are sort of a colonial bird and they'll nest on the sand. So they nest in little scrapes on the sand. They'll just scrape out a little hole and lay between 1 and 3 eggs. And they'll nest in fairly close quarters with each other. And so they have a bit of a colonial benefit. If there's predators around, they can fly into the air, which is good for bird predators. But if it's a four-wheel drive or a dog, it's pretty much useless. And so they're very vulnerable, just sitting on the beach nesting. So both adults will tend the nest and they'll incubate for about 3 weeks, and then the chicks will hatch. And these chicks in this picture are, I think, hatched that morning, possibly the night before, and they'll spend 1 or 2 days in the little scrape, and then they'll head off into the dune system where they'll sort of hang around amongst the beach spinifex and possibly any debris that's lying around, and their parents will feed them flat out for 3 weeks. So if I go back, if you look at the size of that bit of white bait, that's their main food that little chick's getting fed. It's pretty big, and they've found birds that have choked because the parents have been feeding them so much. But after 3 weeks of extreme feeding, they'll fledge and they'll be flying. And then typically around March, they'll fly back. They'll make a flight back to Southeast Asia as just young birds. So they can start breeding anywhere from about November, depending on when they arrive. But yeah, about November is a fairly good estimate. And they'll we just need to take care of them during their breeding period. I'll get to what we do to look after them in a little bit. Yeah, so that's the little terns. So yeah, there might be 50 nests at a time on the beach, but they won't typically all hatch. There's a fair few threats. Another bird, this is less common in the Manning, but it's pretty striking. It's probably one of the most striking shorebirds. It's like certainly nothing else has a beak like that, and not much else is coloured like that. Most of the birds here are, as I said before, in their non-breeding plumage, so they're just looking pretty dull, just here to rest and eat heaps of invertebrates so they can fly back. But this one, the red-necked avocet, I saw a couple here in the Manning last year, but they breed mainly in southwest Australia, and they're an Australian endemic. There's other avocets around the world, but these ones just hang out here, and sometimes Cape York and Papua New Guinea. So another bird that we're at pretty much the very southern limit of its range in the Manning. There's one pair that I know of in Port Stephens. There's one individual in the Manning. There was a pair that bred here for several years, but a dog ate one. Now there's just one, sort of hoping that maybe a mate will fly in at some point. But this is another one of the birds that I monitor under the Saving Our Species contract. So they're critically endangered in New South Wales, but federally they're not listed at all. And I think from what I've heard in Queensland, they're everywhere apparently. Well, maybe not everywhere, but yeah, they're doing pretty well. But here at the southern end of their range, they're pretty rare and they're pretty hard to see. They're pretty secretive birds, and they'll sort of hide in the shade in the mangroves and then come out around sundown. I think I saw the one in the Manning maybe 3 times over 6 months or something last year. But yeah, no new mate for that one as yet, which is unfortunate. But they got a big, like pretty big, strong, powerful beak for smashing up crabs. So this is taken at old bars. It's just so they'll feed on the sand flats where they feed on crabs and other invertebrates. Yeah, so we're still holding out hope. So if anyone sees 2 beachstone curlews together in the Manning, let me know. That would be great. So this is the third species that I monitor their nesting in the Manning. So these are the pied oystercatchers. That's their plumage all year. So that black and white with a big red beak, they're pretty distinctive. They make a fair racket this time of year. Might be in fairly big groups running around on the front of the sand flats at Harrington. You see them at the moment. So they've started nesting in the Manning. There was 2 nests down at Old Bar. They were lost. One not so sure why, and one I'm pretty sure was a dog. But they will re-nest up to many times. So the ones at Harrington, there was 2 nests the other day, and I think there will be another one pretty much, yeah, hopefully today. I'll check in a couple of days. So I try and check the nests fairly regularly. It's a bit of a balance between disturbance and being able to sort of get an accurate picture of when nests hatched and are laid, and if they're taken, when and why. So we try to keep a close eye on them, but try to also leave them to their own devices. So again, the pied oystercatchers, they nest on the beach, on the sand, a little bit higher than the little terns. The little terns like the really pretty low country, often with lots of stones and bits of shell grit. The pied oystercatchers slightly higher, a bit more vegetation. So they'll incubate sort of between 1 and 3 eggs for about 3.5 weeks, and then the chicks will hatch and pretty much spend their time feeding with their parents, and then their little reaction is to hide. So this one in the little bush, that's it, hiding. They're not very good at hiding, but I guess from the air they're quite hard to see. So yeah, like they're quite a vulnerable bird when they're like that, and they'll hide and freeze. So any dog or anything that walks up to them is pretty much a free meal. But they seem to do okay in the Manning. We had 5 fledglings last year, which was pretty low. Often there'll be a lot more. So hopefully we'll get some more fledglings this year. They're having some pretty big problems with dogs down at Farquhar, but I'll get to that. So I'm going to cover one more bird that is not really even considered an Australian native, but Old Bar is the only place in Australia it's ever been seen. So in 2017, a bird watcher and Liam Murphy from Port Macquarie took some photos and went, oh, that's a pretty strange looking tern, because, well, no matter who you ask, all the terns, they look pretty similar. They're quite hard to pick apart, and Liam's an expert, and he was looking at photos and went, oh, it's a bit different, and then noticed that it was a totally new species for Australia. And this was pretty exciting in the bird world. It took the bird world by storm in Australia. And so they've been back here each year since 2017. There was 10 birds here. And so I can't remember exactly how many people they thought came to see it, but it was pretty big news. And there was a study conducted about how much money that they brought in, just these little birds. They reckon up to $360,000 just the first season, people coming to see the bird. And even last season, which was 2 seasons later, I met people from Broome and South Australia still here to see the little birds. So I mean, I would argue that's a pretty good method of tourism to encourage people. It's pretty low impact. Most of them don't even drive onto the beach when they could. They'll walk onto the beach and take some photos, see the bird, tick it off the list, and then go and spend money in our area. So these sand flats at Farquhar, they're typically protected by the nesting bird fence. So the beach nesting bird management actions have, it's an argument, I guess, but it's helped create and maintain good shorebird habitat, and possibly given this bird a place to land and given us the only place in Australia that you can see this bird. So I encourage you to get down there and check it out. It's somewhat exciting. Okay, so the Manning Estuary, I'll talk about the habitat for shorebirds. It's pretty broad. Basically anywhere where there's water, on the edge of the water, you could consider a shorebird. So inland, you get plenty of shorebirds as well. Sort of more focusing today on the coastal shorebirds, and particularly on the map here, the two Manning inlets. So these are untrained, mostly untrained. There's a bit of a wall at Manning Point and a bit at Harrington, but mostly untrained inlets. They provide really good shorebird habitat because it's a constantly moving sand banks that they keep the vegetation down, which is essential for any shorebirds because they need to maintain a good line of sight so they can sort of escape foxes and other predators. So yeah, these changing environments, they'll you get over 1,000 birds, not 1,000 species, but 1,000 individuals, even just at Farquhar on a summer's day. So it's pretty popular area, and because a lot of the rivers along the New South Wales coast are totally trained, so you lose a lot of this habitat as soon as you have two breakwalls in there. So shorebirds are like sandy and rocky shores. So on a rocky shore, you'll get a slightly different species composition. And then sand, mudflats, mangroves, and salt marsh are all popular. And different species will sort of specialise in feeding in different methods and in different parts of the estuary. But in these two inlets, you get a pretty wide variety of habitats. So that's, yeah, certainly something to be proud that we have, or feel lucky that we have, and something to look after. So in the Northern Hemisphere, where they go they go for the northern summer, so the bar-tailed Godwits that I mentioned before and the eastern curlews, their sort of breeding grounds are in the Arctic sort of tundra areas, which once they thaw out, apparently they're full of life, lots of wildflowers, lots of invertebrate diversity that will rival even a tropical rainforest. So I think they can really utilize that short summer period of like massive diversity and massive food availability to breed, and then come back here for our summer and relax on the beach. So yeah, the shorebirds, terns are somewhat different. They'll eat whitebait, and there's a gold-billed tern, which I'll get to. They'll eat other eggs and pretty much anything they can find. But typically, those big, long, specialised shaped beaks are for finding invertebrates in the sand. Oh, what happened there? Yeah, so pippies and little tiny polychaetes, crabs, gastropods, and they're very specialised. Like pied oystercatchers have those big, strong red beaks for breaking open shells, and an oyster farmer was even telling me that he's seen them jam them into the oyster shell before they close and get the oysters out. So they're pretty they're very specialised in getting their food out of the benthos. So for migratory birds, every low tide is super important for feeding because they need to put on a lot of body weight to make that trip back. So if they miss a low tide, that's sort of 6 hours of feeding for that day that they've missed. And so this is where human activity can be really disruptive. So I'll talk about threats. There's heaps, really. They just generally live in an environment that's full of threats. So they can, if they've got good, strong populations, that's just part of life. But with declining populations, each little threat sort of magnifies things a lot. But some threats, like foxes, they're obviously not a natural threat in Australia. They're fairly well managed in the Manning through extensive baiting, and it's been going on for decades, so it's pretty well figured out. And I mean, it can still be an issue, particularly if a fox gets through or is bait shy and can hammer a nest area pretty hard. But yeah, typically that foxes are not a huge problem these days, but certainly something that like takes constant management. In the Manning, cats are not really a huge issue, but certainly potential. I think it's probably just the proximity of cats to the nest area. They might just be a little bit far away. But there was a domestic cat at Harrington years ago that did a huge amount of damage in a short, like 1 or 2 nights, I think. I think they trapped it and took it back to its owner, and they locked it up inside at night, and it wasn't a problem anymore. Four-wheel drives, potentially a huge problem if they're not managed. Management can be pretty effectively achieved with fencing and good signs, and also engaging with the four-wheel drive people that use the beach. One of the previous beach wardens had, I guess he quoted, he'd said that he didn't want four-wheel drives to be banned because some of the people that use the four-wheel drives on the beach can be they're a huge asset to the program. So I thought that was an interesting stance, and something that's worth considering with conservation, I think, on the beach, because it is a shared environment. You're better off having people on side than just to totally exclude them, because it typically doesn't work, and there will be people that will break those rules. So four-wheel drives can be damaging because they can run over nests. You pretty much just can't see them. They damage the invertebrate populations in the sand, and they can disturb the birds from that all-important feeding time. Then domestic dogs, they're a huge problem at Farquhar. They were last year, and probably maybe again this year. They're not allowed there, but they are there a lot. 13 pied oystercatcher nests were lost last year, mostly to dogs. There's not a lot we can do. The dogs are just so quick, and with a bird or an egg on the ground, it's just a pretty quick meal. And even if a dog doesn't have bad intent, just them chasing the birds is again disturbing them from that feeding regime. Weather's, as I said, it's always an issue. So windblown sand can cover up nests, but again, the windblown sand sort of creates fresh ground for the birds. So and storms and floods and king tides can destroy a nesting season pretty much straight away, but it also creates the habitat that they need. So it's just the luck of the draw, really. But the problem is that their population is declining. So each storm event, if it wipes out 50 little tern nests, then that's a pretty big portion of their population that probably once would have been able to withstand that. And then human disturbance, such as fireworks right next to a nesting colony, as it happens at Harrington every year. Well, not every year, not this year. And general shore use by humans as well. So we can, as I said, we've got to share the shore, but I mean, ideally, we just wouldn't go to the beach for the summer, but it's not really going to happen. And also crabs, they can just take a few eggs here and there, but not really a huge problem. And then, so there's avian predators as well as raptors, which will take the odd chick here and there. The beach nesting birds, not so much the big birds that have come over to roost here, but the beach nesting birds are pretty much constantly at risk from predators. So the top left picture is a pretty terrible, well, it's actually just super zoomed in picture of a gold-billed tern. They're a major predator here in the Manning Valley. They'll just fly over the nests looking down, and they'll swoop down and pick up eggs. And the corvids, so crows and ravens, they're just opportunistic predators. They'll even see humans and associate us with food. So one of the things we do, 1 second, Stacey is here. Yeah, so crows will, they can associate humans with food, and so we need to be careful when we're in the nesting area because they're just too smart. And once they learn, there's not much you can do. Once a family group learns, they'll probably keep coming back. And it's been noted, I think more with the gulls in the past, they did learn the nest markers that we used to use and started associating them with food. But yeah, they fixed that problem. So seagulls have been opportunistic predators in the past and pretty much wiped out whole colonies, typically following bad weather events. So the avian predators were traditionally controlled by shooting, but particularly with gold-billed terns, they're just a native predator that's doing their thing, and also shooting on the beach is not so much in favour anymore. So I'm actually doing some research at the moment to try and find a non-lethal method, hopefully using some type of camouflage to trick the avian predators. So that's ongoing, and the fieldwork's about to start for that once the little tern nesting starts. Yeah, so as I said, there's lots of threats, but they still get there. They still breed, and they still use our shores, and particularly for roosting. The Manning's a really popular roosting spot, and there's heaps of shorebirds that are easy to see, not so easy to identify, but easy to see. And yeah, you can get out there and have a look. Sorry, 1 sec. There we go. So how can you, and I guess I, help? So everyone can help by obeying the 4-wheel drive rules. If you're driving on the beach, you're required to only drive between the tide marks, keep to the speed limits, and you need to watch out for small birds, particularly the chicks. Once they get a bit older than the one in the picture, they call them runners because they pretty much run everywhere, but they can get stuck in wheel ruts, and then the next car goes in the car before's wheel ruts and gets squashed. This has happened quite a lot through the history of the sort of management in the Manning Valley. So it just requires people driving on the beach to really watch out for the birds and stay out of where they're not supposed to be. It's pretty important to follow dog regulations. So no, there's no dogs at all at Farquhar Inlet. Well, there's not supposed to be dogs at all, but there is. And not letting dogs chase the birds is really important. Ideally walking them close to the shore, and just generally leaving the birds alone as much as possible. Excuse me. So as part of the shorebird season, we'll erect some fences at Harrington, and there's some permanent fencing at Farquhar and some temporary fencing. The temporary fencing at Harrington went up last week. Excuse me. So the temporary fencing's up for the year, and there's a new permanent fence going in at Farquhar. And it's pretty important that everyone respects these fences, and generally, I have to say, people do. There's just that single strand of wire is a pretty effective barrier. It just gives a bit of a buffer zone between the nesting area and humans, and just tries to leave them alone as much as possible, and just let cars know where they're not supposed to go, and dogs know. It seems to work pretty well. And then another way you can help is educating friends and family and strangers about shorebirds, because the more we know, the more interesting they become, really. And it's actually not that hard to live with them. We can do it, and then they can benefit, and then we can actually get more enjoyment out of going to the beach. I found it pretty rewarding doing a lot of community engagement last summer. I did a lot just along the breakwall at Harrington. I took a telescope down and talked to a lot of holiday makers, and people were typically pretty interested to know what the fences were for, what was going on. Some people was sort of interested, but when I asked them if they wanted to see the birds, they'd be like, "Oh, no, not at all." But mostly people were pretty keen to know. And once you told them where that bird had come from, it just flew from Siberia a few weeks ago, they were pretty impressed. So yeah, I think I'm educating people. I'm biased on this because I'm a pretty bit of a bird nerd. So, but I think it's a slippery slope once you sort of give people a few ID pointers. They're pretty keen to know more. And so when we're on the beach, yeah, we need to watch out for the nests. So you can see how hard they are to see from right above it. So if you're in a car, you've got no hope of seeing that. And they can be outside the fence if I haven't found them yet, because despite me telling them where to nest, they don't always nest there. So yeah, this is a little tern nest. This is a sort of substrate they'll nest in. So we just need to be pretty mindful of where they nest. So these are just potential nest sites. This would be more likely to be a pied oystercatcher nesting area. So in this sort of pretty sparsely vegetated spinifex dunes, you could get pied oystercatchers nesting there. And so it's important to keep dogs out of the dunes. And you can see a pied oystercatcher, they'll get off their nest and walk away looking fairly suspicious. So if you see that, there's a good chance there's a nest around. Another bird I probably should have included that nests on the beaches, that I don't actually monitor their nests, but they seem to nest with some success, is the red-capped plover. They're a tiny little bird, and they'll also leave their nest when they see you coming and appear to have a broken wing. So that's another nesting behaviour birds might do. So if you see birds that look like they have a broken wing, maybe they do, but they probably don't. They might just be trying to get you away from its nest, so you can probably just leave the air, move a bit away, and they'll go back to sitting on the egg, and they'll probably be successful. They seem to succeed despite the odds pretty well. So here there's eggs. I don't know if you can see, if you can spot them. There they are. There's just a little nest there. I don't know what nest that is. That was just a photo I had. It looks like little tern eggs, but yeah, it could be either. Just again, really hard to see, and a dog could walk past and pick it up, and you might not even know that it picked it up. So if you still want to do and learn more, we have some shorebird ID books for whoever's interested. So that can get you started on your shorebird adventure, and we're doing pretty regular surveys. If you wanted to come along and do some surveys and learn to ID some more shorebirds. So if you want to either raise your hand, I guess, or just put a yes, please, in the chat box, and between myself and Helen, we'll get some shorebird ID books out to anyone that's interested. They're a pretty handy little thing that fits in your pocket, so you don't have to carry around a huge bird guide. And you just start to ID a few things along the shore, and hopefully pester some other members of the public with your new knowledge, and then they'll get the bug. But also, there was an ulterior motive to this talk.
Sorry, I'll just say, if you are interested in getting one of those books, just write in the chat section, just write Shorebird book, so that I know what you're saying yes to. And then Silas will explain a few other things we can do. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Yeah, so I had an ulterior motive with this talk. Part of what I'd really like to do this season is to get together an emergency response team together for some inundation management. So inundations with these birds that nest on this low ground is a constant threat, and it can wipe out a nesting area in hours. And it might only be one sort of really high spring tide that does it, but with the little terns, they're super resilient to moving the nests. So you can pick the eggs up, move them sort of up to around 3 or 4 meters, and raise them up with sandbags. And often you try to avoid doing it, but often it needs to be done quickly. And so I'm pretty keen to get a team of people together that might want to have a bit of a practice doing it, just on a bit of like not nesting area. And then if it comes to it, we might need to go down and do it quickly before a spring tide or before a flooding event. And also another thing that would need to be done in a flooding event is just really quickly taking down fencing at Farquhar and possibly Harrington. It's just something that, well, obviously we don't want anything to wash into the sea. It's probably not, you're not going to be working in the best conditions. In the case of the flooding, it might be pouring rain, but it'll just be ripping down fence really quickly and getting it out of the way, if particularly if they're going to open the southern inlet again, if it's triggered by the flood levels. So again, if anyone's interested in learning more about volunteering for the emergency response team, that would be, yeah, it'd be awesome. And I think volunteers are going to be best for the job, really, because, well, they care and they live locally and can be mobilised way quicker than any government agency, really. So this is stuff that needs to happen when it needs to happen, not once the forms have gone through or anything. So that's pretty much all I have to say, and unless there's questions. Hopefully you've got lots of questions, because I'll try to elaborate on any points that I can. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Silas. And I'll just say, if later on, when you've had a bit of time to think about it, you go, oh, actually, I would be interested in being involved in the inundation work or anything like that, just feel free to email me. Just respond to one of the emails I have sent about today, and I'll put you on a list. I'll get you in touch with Silas, so he can help. He can help out. We've got a few names already, which is awesome. And I've just realised I forgot at the beginning to actually introduce myself. Some of you don't know who I am. So I'm the one you've been hearing from. I'm Helen Kemp. I'm the Manning Coastcare Coordinator. So I look after the Coastcare volunteers from Harrington down to Hallidays. So that's who I am. Yeah, so thank you so much, Silas. That was awesome. And does anybody have any questions? We might just...
Yeah, Stan's got one the chat here. So, yeah, that's a good question, Stan. So I don't police it myself. It's typically a council ranger job. But maybe at really busy times, police might be on the beach doing breath testing. I know they're at boat ramps. But, yeah, it's a council ranger job. They are out on beaches pretty much every day, but there's a huge amount of beaches. And they try to get around. Unfortunately, it's a pretty small minority of people that actually, do a lot of that damage. But one thing you can do, there's an app called Eyewitnessed. You can download it, and it's designed to, you work through, like, you take photos they'll be geo-referenced with where you are. So if you saw people driving in the dunes, like, you wouldn't want to put yourself at any danger, though. Like, I often find I'm alone on a beach and I don't feel super comfortable with taking photos of someone doing something illegal. However, this app will guide you through the process of what information is required to get, well, not so much a conviction, but to issue a fine. And people have been fined from evidence given in this Eyewitnessed app. So we could probably email out some info on that. It's pretty worthwhile, and that is a good way to police stuff, because once word does get around, it yes, people seem to stop breaking the law as much anyway. But yeah, that's one way we can contribute to the policing, because I think the rangers are fairly stretched a lot of the time, especially when it's busy.
I'll get Silas to send me the link to that app and send it out to everyone. I'll pass that information on to everyone here.
I'll just see if there's any more questions. Oh, there's heaps of information, interest in everything. Thanks, everyone.
There was the question about climate change and development.
Yep, huge. it'll be massive right across the world. So development's already a huge problem in the coastal areas. It's not really going to let up at any time. I guess in some developed countries, we're getting a little bit better at protecting areas. One problem I see, I'll sort of tangent a little bit with, I know with a big economic downturn coming, it's possible that a lot of the so-called green tape might be circumvented and some coastal development will become more of a problem when ideally it'll be becoming less. Climate change will, yeah, most certainly impact, and probably already is. Sea level is rising. So that'll effectively, in a perfect world, it would force the habitat back inland into higher ground. So the same habitats might move, but there's nowhere to move on most developed coastlines. So it'll effectively be gone, particularly in like sandy shores and salt marshes. It'll just be hard up against development in some areas. And then with the sort of predicted bigger, terrible, like extreme weather events, they'll probably, I guess, they'll wreck more nesting seasons. Last year's nesting season was severely disturbed in Harrington, at least, and down much of the coast, I think. I haven't seen the final numbers, but the little terns started nesting in Harrington when the first fires started, and then they stopped, and then they started again, and then the rest of the Manning Valley caught on fire, and they stopped again for a couple of weeks. So it's already having an impact, and I think it will continue to have an impact. I try not to be too pessimistic, but realistically, the coastal environment is it's heavily impacted by all of these factors and human development. So probably will cause more decline in the birds. Yep, unfortunately. Stan, is this track, is that in Harrington or at the back of Halliday's Point area? Stan there. Oh, you might need to unmute, Stan. In any case, tracks seem to, oh yeah, there we go. Back of Tuncurry to Hallidays. It's probably worth reporting to council. I'd say they know about it. I know they've done significant blocking of tracks in Harrington, and they just keep building more tracks, which in turn actually just ends up more and more of the vegetation gets pushed back. It's definitely worth reporting, but I'd say they probably know about it. You could maybe, if you could get photos of people, they might be getting fined. But yeah, it's probably an issue to take up with council, I'd say. Any other questions?
Silas, was there something that people can get involved in actually monitoring or helping with counts or anything like that?
Yeah, so we're looking to do monthly surveys of both the Manning inlets from now until perpetuity, really. We're currently sort of been doing surveys to try and get a good systematic route down. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more about the actual bird ID, we can get out on the beach and look at some birds and then start to do ID. And then, yeah, in time, we'll want to have a bunch of people that are good at bird ID and can do reliable surveys, so we can have a constant, like, ongoing survey of the Manning, both inlets, for long term, because long term studies are really valuable, and definitely birds are one thing that citizen science is proving pretty valuable. I think there's fairly long term studies of lots of areas, and there's good data collection. There's bird data that's run through BirdLife. So that's, you can take your bird lists and submit them online. So this is data that's constantly coming in from people all around. But yeah, if you want to come and learn more about the birds and learn to ID and possibly do surveys down the track, yeah, just get in touch with myself or Helen. And
or do we want to yeah, if you want, you can put just go into the chat right now if you're interested in something like that, and I'll take another list of people, and then I can contact.
Are you taking this list? Are you, Helen?
Sorry?
Are you getting this list down?
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
I'm writing everyone's names now, so.
Yeah, so that's it's awesome to see so many people interested. That's really good. I think there might be less people when I do the forward drive talk.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, is there any more questions on anything?
Wow, look at that. We're right on the hour mark.
Oh, cool.
That's worked out really well. All right, well, as I said, if you have any more questions, or if you would like more information about anything, or would like to get involved in either, I guess, ID training, monitoring training, or being involved in the inundation, volunteering, anything like that, just flick me an email, just respond to one of the emails I've sent through, and I'll be more than happy to set you on the right path. And but thank you very much, Silas. That was really awesome. Really.
Yeah, thanks everyone. As a side note, like I'll be around Harrington, Sandspit, and Parkway Inlet pretty much a couple of times a week for the next 6 months. So if you see me, or if you wanted to catch up and look at some birds, I'll just send me an email, or just yell at me from across the street, and yeah, I'll be there with a telescope and binoculars. So yeah, just say good day.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm just making sure I've got everybody's numbers. Oh, sorry, not numbers. Everybody's names. I think that's everyone. Cool. Got your rows. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been fantastic.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Helen, for organising it.
Thanks, Silas. That was great. I think you've got to be the one to close it down, Silas.
Right. All right. All the power. See you later.
See you, Silas. Thank you.